Well, the headline of this protest is "Women Won't Wait," because it's been 20 weeks since the Supreme Court ruling and the Scottish Government have done nothing to sort out the implications of that ruling and to withdraw guidance which has been manifestly unlawful actually since we won our first judicial review 3 years ago, and they're still not getting on with the job at hand. So we just want them to quash unlawful guidance, to follow the Supreme Court and get on with it.
Do you not think the government is dealing with a bit of a complex issue here? Clearly this is policies that have been in the public sector for a long time. Is there not quite a lot for them to work through here? Is it perhaps not something that can be dealt with very quickly?
Well, not really. Actually, those policies should never have been in the public sector, and it's quite straightforward because the Scottish Parliament body managed it for the Parliament building itself. They just put down a quick change saying that facilities were for one sex or the other and that there were third spaces available for those who needed them. And in public bodies, you know, there's usually a large facility. We're talking about the NHS, we're talking about schools and prisons. There aren't that many men in women's prisons. They could be removed quite easily and quite swiftly.
How do you see public bodies dealing with this situation there? You mentioned the possibility of third spaces. Perhaps not all institutions will be able to do that. So how can they get around that issue? And is that somewhere where actually you might agree with perhaps campaigners on the other side that a third space is the best way forward?
I think most public bodies, we're talking about organisations with large estates. So when we're talking about the NHS, or we're talking about when we're talking about hospitals or schools, we're talking about places with large estates, and they could provide those third spaces. In fact, the problem is that some of these campaigners don't want a third space. They're not prepared to do that. What they want is access to women's spaces. And so they are not prepared to abide by the ruling, and they're putting pressure on the Scottish Government to ignore the ruling as well. Well, we would just like them to restore women's rights. That's all we've ever wanted, and we want them to quash unlawful guidance and to make sure that women's spaces and services are protected.
And what would you say to perhaps people in the trans community who saw that Supreme Court ruling, perhaps felt alarmed by it and feel that, you know, perhaps the government may be less interested in their rights now?
Well, they've always had the same rights. The Supreme Court ruling didn't change anything. The issue has been organisations which have lied about what people were allowed to do. And some of those organisations were funded by this government. And actually, it's those organisations that people should now be looking at and asking why they were allowed to lie about the law.
Things feel so unsafe, you've given the government more control over my...
But all of us have done this. I can't believe that when we spoke to the government, when we spoke to other politicians, that our concerns were dismissed by the former First Minister, an alleged feminist to her fingertips, as not valid.
Thank you for bringing the sunshine to Edinburgh, but can I get you to do one thing first? Because I'm finding it hard to hear you over that noise. Can you make some noise so people in that building hear you too?
Here, amongst the women that stood up against all the crap that we got in this place. We're now standing up for more nonsense. 20 weeks since the Supreme Court decision. In 20 weeks you could run 5 Tour de France's for the rights and protections of women and young girls. And we will continue to do that, people, until the government listen and John of my colleagues that have stood against the toxicity and the abuse that we received.
My name is Tracy Edwards, as you know, but some of you may know me from skippering Maiden, the first all-female crew to ever sail around the world. Some of you may know me from standing up and saying that awful sentence, a man can't be a woman. I hope you'll forgive a Sassenach for standing here today, speaking in front of the Scottish Parliament, but my mother's side of the family is Scottish. My grandmother was a fifer. She grew up in Bannockburn and she trained to be a nurse in Dundee. And I can actually hear her turning in her grave as the Scottish Parliament, the British government, the Welsh Senedd, and the National Assembly for Northern Ireland stand by while women's rights are systematically ripped away from us. Sorry, I'm so unfit about breath. Shouting above all that noise. I, like you, thought that our politicians would understand the law. I thought they would obey the law, and I thought they would implement the law. But no! There are still men in women's prisons. Sorry. Nurses' changing rooms, women's toilets. The Women's Scotland, sorry. Take further legal action against the Scottish Government for policies in schools and prisons that are inconsistent with its duties. I might have to wrap up soon, but I wanted to feel a bit lightheaded. Sorry. Scotland. Thank you to all of us for shouting and screaming and fighting. We will never, ever, ever stop until our politicians recognise women's God-given rights that we have fought for.